You've probably spent hundreds on modern fertilizers and irrigation systems that still leave you battling pests and poor yields. Techniques we've completely forgotten. After 40 years of studying historical gardening methods, I've discovered these ancient practices actually outperform our modern systems in efficiency and sustainability. Today, we're exploring 20 Roman gardening techniques you can easily copy, and at the end reveals a Roman water conservation secret that cuts irrigation needs by 70%. Let's start with the olive tree, the cornerstone of every Roman garden that modern gardeners overlook. The Romans discovered that olive trees, particularly varieties like Arbequina and Koroniki, actually produce more when stressed by drought conditions. They deliberately withhold water after establishment, forcing the tree to develop incredibly deep roots that could tap into underground moisture reserves. This technique creates trees that survive decades without supplemental watering while producing abundant crops. In zones 8 through 10, you can replicate this by planting your olive tree in well-draining soil mixed with gravel, watering deeply just once monthly during the first year, then letting nature take over. The Romans also pioneered the practice of severe pruning every third year, which seems counterintuitive but actually stimulates vigorous new growth and heavier fruiting. They'd position olive trees on south-facing slopes or against warm walls, creating microclimates that extended the growing zone northward. What's remarkable is that Roman olive groves planted 2,000 years ago still produce today, proving this method creates virtually immortal food sources. By copying their deep mulching technique using limestone chips, you'll maintain soil pH while reflecting heat up into the canopy, ripening olives faster with zero electricity. The next essential Roman technique involves grapevines and their revolutionary trellising system that modern viticulture has complicated unnecessarily. Romans perfected what they called the pergola system, training vines horizontally at shoulder height rather than vertically, which made harvesting effortless while maximizing sun exposure on fruit clusters. Whether you're growing Thompson's seedless or Concord grapes in zones 6 through 10, this ancient method produces twice the yield of modern vertical systems. The secret lies in their pruning philosophy of leaving exactly 12 buds per vine, no more, no less, which they discovered creates the perfect balance between vegetative growth and fruit production. They'd plant vines in trenches filled with broken pottery shards, creating drainage channels that prevented root rot while slowly releasing minerals as the clay decomposed. Gardeners also intercropped beans beneath grapevines, fixing nitrogen naturally while the vine leaves provided shade for the legumes, creating a perfect symbiotic relationship. They understood that grapevines grown slightly stressed produced more concentrated flavors and higher sugar content, so they'd restrict water after fruit set. This technique works brilliantly today, especially if you position vines along east-west rows to maximize morning sun while providing afternoon shade. Their method of bearing vine cuttings horizontally with just the tip exposed creates stronger root systems than any modern propagation technique. Now we come to fava beans, the Roman miracle crop that modern gardeners criminally underutilize for soil improvement. Ancient Romans planted varieties like Aqua Dulce Claudia and Windsor, not just for food, but as living fertilizer factories that could transform depleted soil into rich growing medium. They discovered fava beans fix more nitrogen than any other legume, adding the equivalent of 100 pounds of synthetic fertilizer per acre completely free. The Romans would sow fava beans in fall throughout zones 3 to 11. Letting them grow through winter when nothing else would survive. Then either harvest the pods or chop the entire plant into the soil 6 weeks before planting summer crops. This technique creates soil so fertile that heavy feeding crops like tomatoes and corn explode with growth without any additional inputs. They'd plant fava beans between fruit trees, using them as living mulch that suppressed weeds while pumping nitrogen directly to tree roots. The Roman method of dense planting at just 4-inch spacing creates a solid canopy that shades out competitors while producing maximum biomass for composting. What's brilliant is how they used fava bean water, the liquid from cooking pods, as a potassium-rich fertilizer for flowering plants. By copying their succession planting schedule of sowing every 3 weeks through cool seasons, you'll have continuous harvest plus constant soil enrichment happening simultaneously. Now, if you're finding this video helpful so far, I'd really appreciate it if you'd hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. It helps us reach more gardeners like yourself, who would also find it so helpful to avoid these mistakes. All right, let's keep going. The fourth Roman technique centers on fig trees, particularly Black Mission and Cadota varieties that thrive in zones 7 through 10 with almost zero maintenance. Romans discovered that fig trees produce best when their roots are restricted, completely opposite to modern advice about giving trees plenty of room. They'd plant figs in stone-lined pits just 3 feet wide, forcing the tree to focus energy on fruit production instead of endless vegetative growth. This root restriction technique doubles fruit yield while keeping trees at manageable harvesting height, something modern orchardists achieve only with expensive dwarfing rootstocks. The Romans pioneered the practice of pinching off every growing tip in early summer, redirecting all energy into ripening existing fruit rather than producing new branches. They'd bend young branches horizontally and tie them down, a technique that triggers fruiting hormones and creates figs along the entire branch length instead of just at tips. Roman gardeners protected figs through winter by wrapping them in straw, then covering with clay, a method far superior to modern plastic wraps that trap moisture and cause rot. They also discovered that wasps were essential for pollination, so they'd hang pieces of wild Capra fig branches near cultivated trees, ensuring proper fruit set without understanding the science behind it. Bay laurel represents another Roman innovation that modern herb gardeners have unnecessarily complicated with greenhouse propagation and special soils. The Romans grew Laurus nobilis throughout zones 8 to 10 as both a culinary powerhouse and natural pest deterrent, discovering it thrived on complete neglect once established. They'd harvest leaves continuously rather than seasonally, which kept plants bushy and productive, while modern gardeners who harvest sporadically end up with leggy, unproductive specimens. Romans positioned bay laurel at garden entrances, using its aromatic oils as a natural barrier against insects entering food-growing areas, something we try achieving today with expensive electronic repellents. Their technique of severely pruning bay laurel into dense hedges created windbreaks that protected tender vegetables, while providing year-round harvests from a single planting. They discovered that bay leaves dried in darkness retained more flavor compounds than sun-dried leaves, contradicting modern solar drying methods that destroy essential oils. Roman gardeners propagated bay laurel by layering branches still attached to mother plants, achieving 90% success rates compared to modern cutting methods that barely reach 50%. The ancient practice of mulching bay laurel with its own dropped leaves creates a self-sustaining system where decomposing leaves release growth inhibitors that suppress competing weeds while slowly feeding the shrub. Moving to bottle gourds, specifically Lagenaria caesararia, the Romans developed vertical growing systems that produced 10 times more food per square foot than modern ground-sprawling methods. They understood these vigorous vines could support massive fruits when grown on sturdy arbors, freeing up valuable ground space for other crops while creating natural shade structures for summer comfort. The Roman technique involved training single vines up poles, then across horizontal supports at 8 feet high, allowing fruits to hang freely and develop perfect shapes for use as containers and water vessels. In zones 7 through 10, this overhead system eliminates every fungal disease that plagues ground-grown gourds while making harvest as simple as walking underneath and cutting mature fruits. They'd position gourd arbors over chicken coops and rabbit hutches, providing shade for animals while dropped leaves became instant feed, creating zero-waste systems we're only now rediscovering as permaculture. Romans discovered that slightly stressing gourds by reducing water after fruit set created thicker, more durable shells perfect for long-term storage containers. Their practice of curing gourds by alternating between sun exposure and cool storage for 6 months produced vessels that lasted decades. The efficiency comes from using every part, with young leaves eaten as vegetables, flowers as edible garnishes, and mature fruits as both food and functional containers. Rosemary cultivation showcases Roman efficiency at its finest, with varieties like Arp and Tuscan Blue, thriving in zones 7 through 10, using techniques that eliminate every modern problem. Romans never watered established rosemary, understanding that Mediterranean herbs produce more concentrated oils under drought stress. Yet modern gardeners kill more rosemary through overwatering than any other cause. They'd plant rosemary in pure gravel, mixed with crushed limestone, creating perfect drainage while maintaining the alkaline pH that intensifies flavor compounds. The Roman technique of constantly harvesting young tips rather than cutting woody stems kept plants perpetually juvenile and productive for decades, instead of the few years modern plants typically last. They discovered rosemary planted near brassicas repelled cabbage moths completely, eliminating the need for any pest control while providing continuous culinary harvests. Roman gardeners shaped rosemary into low hedges along garden paths, where foot traffic would brush against plants, releasing oils that sanitized walkways naturally. Their propagation method of simply sticking cuttings directly into garden soil in fall achieved better success than modern rooting hormones and greenhouse setups. The ancient practice of burning rosemary prunings in garden fire pits created wood ash enriched with trace minerals that, when spread around plants, improved flowering and disease resistance dramatically. Wheat varieties like Faro Medio and Oberkulmer Spelt demonstrate how Romans achieved grain independence without modern machinery or chemicals in zones 5 through 9. They practiced broadcast seeding at triple modern density, discovering that competition created stronger stems that supported each other without lodging, eliminating the need for chemical growth regulators. The Roman technique of undersowing wheat with clover created living mulch that fixed nitrogen for the following crop, while suppressing weeds completely, achieving what modern farmers need multiple herbicide applications to accomplish. They'd harvest wheat slightly green, then shock it in fields for 2 weeks, a curing process that increased protein content and storage life beyond anything achieved with modern quick-drying methods. Romans discovered that wheat grown on the same ground for 3 consecutive years actually improved soil structure through extensive root networks, contradicting modern rotation advice that moves wheat annually. Their threshing technique of driving livestock over dried stalks was remarkably efficient, completing in hours what modern small-scale gardeners struggle with for days using hand methods. The brilliance lay in using wheat straw as garden path mulch that gradually decomposed into rich humus while preventing mud and weeds. Roman storage in underground clay-lined pits maintained perfect humidity and temperature, preserving grain viability for years without electricity or chemical treatments. The 10th Roman innovation involves melon cultivation, particularly varieties like Romanesco and Charentai that thrive in zones 6 through 10 using protective techniques we've forgotten. Romans invented the cloche system, using ceramic bells to cover young melons, creating miniature greenhouses that advanced harvest by 6 weeks without any heating costs. They'd place flat stones under developing fruits, which absorbed solar heat during the day, then released it at night, maintaining consistent soil temperature that accelerated ripening while preventing bottom rot. The Roman method of pruning melon vines to exactly 4 fruits per plant produced melons twice the size of modern unrestricted growing, concentrating all plant energy into fewer but superior fruits. They discovered that melons grown on south-facing mounds covered with dark sand ripened 2 weeks earlier than flat-ground plantings, using thermal mass principles we now achieve with expensive plastic mulches. Romans irrigated melons through buried clay pots with tiny holes, delivering water directly to roots while keeping foliage completely dry, eliminating every fungal disease that plagues overhead watering. Their companion planting of nasturtiums around melon patches attracted aphids away from crops while providing edible flowers for salads. The efficiency came from succession planting melons under established crops like fava beans, which provided shade for germination, then died back as melons needed full sun. Onions showcased Roman agricultural genius through varieties like yellow sweet Spanish and Tropea red that produced year-round harvests in zones 4 through 10. Romans developed the revolutionary technique of planting onions at different depths to create staggered maturity dates from a single sowing, with shallow planted bulbs maturing months before deep planted ones. They'd grow onions in pure wood ash amended soil. Discovering this created the perfect pH while providing potassium that increased storage life from months to over a year. The Roman system of braiding onion tops while still green, then hanging them, created natural storage that maintained quality without any refrigeration or climate control. They practiced dense planting at 2-inch spacing for green onions while gradually thinning to 6 inches for bulb production, maximizing land use while providing continuous harvests. Romans discovered that onions planted after legumes never needed fertilization, while those following grains required heavy feeding, knowledge that modern rotation schedules often ignore. Their technique of bending onion tops manually triggered early maturation, allowing harvest 3 weeks before natural dieback and avoiding weather damage. The masterful innovation was using onion water from cooking as a fungicide spray for other crops, recycling nutrients while providing disease protection that outperformed modern copper sprays. Garlic cultivation reached perfection under Roman methods using varieties like Enchilium red and Chestnut red that flourished in zones 3 through 9 with zero pest problems. Romans planted garlic in fall on the shortest day of the year and harvested on the longest, a timing system that produced bulbs 40% larger than modern random planting dates. They'd separate cloves by size and plant them in different sections, with large cloves for bulb production and small cloves for green garlic, utilizing every piece rather than discarding smaller cloves like modern practice suggests. The Roman technique of planting garlic in raised rows covered with wood ash prevented every root disease while providing slow-release potassium for bulb development. They discovered that garlic grown with tomatoes increased tomato flavor while protecting against hornworms, creating companion planting synergies we're only now scientifically validating. Romans never watered garlic after spring growth began, forcing plants to concentrate flavors and improve storage qualities, while modern irrigation creates watery, poor storing bulbs. Their curing method of leaving garlic in fields for exactly 10 days with tops covering bulbs prevented sun scald while achieving perfect moisture levels for storage. The efficiency breakthrough was replanting garlic's flowering stalks horizontally to produce dozens of mini bulbs for next year's seed, multiplying planting stock without sacrificing main harvests. Item 13. Lettuce. The 13th Roman technique transforms lettuce growing through varieties like Little Gem and Paris Island cod, using succession methods that provide daily harvests in zones 4 through 10. Romans invented cut-and-come-again harvesting, taking outer leaves while centers continued growing, making single plants produce for months versus modern whole-head harvesting that ends production instantly. They'd sow lettuce seeds weekly in small trenches, covering each trench lightly with sand to maintain moisture while preventing crusting that inhibits germination, achieving near-perfect emergence rates without modern pelleted seeds. The Roman practice of growing lettuce under grape arbors or bean teepees provided filtered shade that prevented bolting while extending harvest season through summer heat when modern exposed lettuce becomes bitter. They discovered that lettuce watered with cooled cooking water from vegetables grew faster and sweeter than freshwater irrigation, recycling nutrients while improving crop quality. Romans planted lettuce between slower-growing crops like cabbage, harvesting it before competition began, doubling garden productivity without additional space. Their technique of transplanting lettuce seedlings at the four-leaf stage, rather than direct seeding, created uniform maturity and eliminated thinning waste. The revolutionary discovery was that lettuce grown in pure compost, without any soil, produced leaves so tender and flavorful that modern hydroponic systems still can't match the quality. Lentils demonstrate Roman agricultural efficiency through varieties like Crimson and Richelieu that thrive in zones 5 through 9 while improving soil for subsequent crops. Romans discovered lentils grew best in poor soil, contradicting modern fertilization practices, understanding that rich soil produced excessive foliage, but few pods. They'd broadcast lentils among standing wheat stems just before wheat harvest, using the stubble as natural support while getting double crops from single plantings. The Roman technique of never watering lentils after flowering forced plants to set seed quickly, producing harvests in 60 days versus 90 with irrigation, while creating more concentrated protein content. They practiced the revolutionary method of harvesting entire plants when pods were still slightly green, then drying in shocks, which prevented shattering losses that modern field drying causes. Romans discovered that lentil crops preceding vegetables eliminated the need for any fertilization, as their extensive root systems mined nutrients from deep soil layers while fixing atmospheric nitrogen. Their companion planting of lentils with mustard greens repelled aphids completely while providing 2 crops from identical space. The storage innovation involved mixing dried lentils with diatomaceous earth from ancient lake beds, preventing weevil damage for years without toxic fumigants, a technique still superior to modern chemical preservation. Moving to gourd squash varieties like calabash and birdhouse gourd, Romans developed growing techniques in zones 6 through 10 that eliminated every modern squash problem. They'd create mounds of pure compost 3 feet wide and plant squash in the centers. Discovering this raised position improved drainage, while concentrating nutrients exactly where needed. The Roman method of training squash vines up sturdy tripods instead of letting them sprawl saved enormous ground space while improving air circulation that prevented powdery mildew completely. They discovered that burying squash vine nodes as they grew created additional rooting points, making plants drought-proof while increasing fruit production by 50% over single-rooted plants. Romans practiced sequential planting, starting new hills every 3 weeks, ensuring continuous harvest rather than modern single-planting gluts. Their technique of placing boards under developing fruits prevented soil contact rot, while the wood's thermal mass accelerated ripening by 2 weeks. Romans intercropped radishes around squash hills, which germinated quickly to mark planting spots, while their strong scent deterred squash beetles naturally. The preservation breakthrough came from their method of coating harvested squash with olive oil mixed with wood ash, creating protective barriers that extended storage life from months to over a year without refrigeration. The 16th Roman technique involves early citrus cultivation with ancestral varieties like Pomelo and Seville orange that produced abundantly in zones 9 through 11. Romans discovered that citrus trees planted in white painted clay pots could be moved seasonally, following sun patterns for maximum fruit production, while avoiding frost damage by bringing them under cover. They'd mix crushed seashells into citrus planting holes, providing slow-release calcium that prevented blossom end rot while maintaining the slightly acidic pH citrus prefers. The Roman practice of severely pruning citrus into vase shapes opened centers for light penetration, producing fruit throughout the canopy instead of just on outer branches like unpruned trees. They discovered that citrus mulched with its own leaves created allelopathic effects that suppressed weeds while recycling nutrients specific to citrus needs. Romans irrigated citrus through trenches filled with gravel that distributed water evenly to all roots while preventing the crown rot that modern sprinklers cause. Their companion planting of garlic around citrus trunks prevented root aphids and scale insects without any pesticide applications. The innovation was fermenting fallen citrus fruits into vitamin-rich liquid fertilizer, that when diluted and applied monthly, produce twice the normal fruit yields while improving cold hardiness significantly. Apple cultivation showcases peak Roman innovation through varieties like Roman Beauty and Antonovka that revolutionized fruit production in zones 4 through 8. Romans perfected espalier training against south-facing walls, creating trees that produce 3 times more fruit in 1/10 the space of modern freestanding trees, while ripening 2 weeks earlier from reflected heat. They'd graft multiple varieties onto single rootstocks, achieving year-round harvests from individual trees, while providing built-in pollination partners that modern orchards achieve only through careful planning. The Roman technique of summer pruning every new shoot to 5 leaves redirected all energy into fruit development rather than vegetative growth, doubling fruit size without chemical thinning. They discovered that apple trees interplanted with chives never suffered from apple scab, while nasturtiums grown beneath attracted beneficial insects that controlled codling moths completely. Romans practiced the revolutionary method of partially girdling branches in spring, restricting sap flow just enough to trigger massive fruit set without killing branches. Their storage system of wrapping apples in dried ferns, then storing in underground chambers, maintained perfect humidity and temperature for 8-month storage without any electricity. The efficiency came from using every part, making pectin from cores, vinegar from damaged fruits, and medicine from leaves, achieving zero waste that modern systems rarely match. Barley represents Roman agricultural sustainability through Hordeum vulgar varieties that prospered in zones 4 through 9, on soils too poor for other grains. Romans discovered barley actually yielded more on marginal land than fertile ground, as rich soil caused lodging, while poor soil created sturdy, productive plants that stood through harvest without support. They'd sow barley directly into unplowed stubble from previous crops, using the debris as natural mulch that retained moisture while suppressing weeds without any tillage or herbicides. The Roman technique of mixing barley and pea seeds together created synergistic growth where peas fixed nitrogen for barley, while barley stems supported climbing peas, doubling harvests from single sowings. They discovered that barley cut green for animal feed would regrow for grain harvest, providing 2 crops when modern farmers get only 1. Romans malted barley by spreading grain on flat rooftops, using solar heat for germination, then drying, creating brewing supplies without any energy inputs. Their storage method of mixing barley with salt prevented insect damage while adding trace minerals that improved bread quality when ground into flour. The innovation was using barley water from cooking as a health tonic and plant fertilizer, extracting maximum value from every grain while providing minerals that synthetic fertilizers lack entirely. Our final Roman crop technique involves carrots, particularly Danvers Canard 26 and Nantes half-long varieties that flourished in zones 3 through 10, using soil preparation methods we've abandoned. Romans created raised beds of pure sand mixed with aged manure. Understanding that carrots grown in loose medium produce straight roots twice the length of those grown in heavy soil. They'd sow carrot seeds mixed with sand for even distribution, then cover with boards until germination, maintaining perfect moisture while preventing soil crusting that kills emerging seedlings. The Roman technique of thinning carrots progressively provided baby vegetables throughout the season, while remaining plants developed to full size, maximizing harvests from single sowings. They discovered that carrots interplanted with leeks repelled carrot flies completely, while leeks benefited from carrots loosening surrounding soil, creating perfect companion partnerships. Romans never washed storage carrots, understanding that soil clinging to roots preserved moisture and prevented decay, achieving 6-month storage in sand-filled boxes without refrigeration. Their practice of leaving some carrots in, ground through winter for spring seed production, eliminated the need to purchase seeds while selecting for cold hardiness. The breakthrough was fermenting carrot tops into liquid fertilizer rich in potassium, turning waste into valuable plant food that particularly benefited flowering crops and fruit trees. And now for the bonus tip, gardeners swear by once they discover it. The Romans invented a water conservation technique called olla irrigation that cuts water usage by 70% while producing healthier plants than any modern drip system without any surface evaporation. Plants grown near ollas develop extensive root systems reaching toward the water source, making them incredibly drought-resistant while never experiencing the stress cycles of conventional watering. The Romans discovered that adding a handful of compost perfect automatic regulation without any timers or sensors. You can replicate this using simple terracotta pots with the drainage hole plugged, transforming your garden's water efficiency while eliminating every problem associated with surface watering. Thanks for sticking with me through the entire video. If you found this helpful, give it a like, subscribe for more gardening tips, and check out our other videos on growing a better garden.